Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world just slightly left of reality, where rats scurry through alleyways, but none of them carry the death sentence that once wiped out half of Europe. Picture yourself in a dense medieval city, the cobblestone streets slick with waste, the taverns loud with drunken laughter, the air thick with the scent of sweat, spices, and something less identifiable. Horses clatter by, children shriek and dart between carts. It's noisy, chaotic, alive, too alive maybe. In this timeline, you won't see a single death cart. No ringing bells, no desperate priests sprinting from door to door with incense, no chalk marks on doors, no crying over swollen buboes. You won't even meet that one creepy uncle who insists the plague was a punishment for dancing too much. Which sounds like a joke, but yes, people really believe that. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all tune in. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the same 14th century streets, but this time, fate's dice land a little differently. Some unlucky merchant's voyage, maybe from Kaffa, maybe from Genoa, gets delayed by a storm. The fleas stay on the boat. The rats never reach the docks. The disease burns out in Asia before it ever hops west. And you're just another person living in the world that dodged history's deadliest bullet. Life feels deceptively normal, but not for long. Without the Black Death to gut populations and shake Europe to its knees, something subtle but massive begins to shift. Cities, no longer cleared out by waves of death, start to groan under their own weight. Every straw roof you pass houses another family. Mom, dad, 6 kids, a goat, and a cousin with a mysterious cough. You see where this is going. The cobblestone alleys become bottlenecks, chamber pots spill, the sewers, what few exist, overflow. And you step carefully. It's not pestilence you fear, it's people, too many of them. Historians still argue whether Europe's rapid urbanization would have occurred even without the plague reshaping society. But in this version of events, cities like Florence, London, and Paris swell like overripe fruit. No periodic purging from nature. Just growth year after year, like a fever that never breaks. You pass a group of tradesmen arguing about wheat prices. One swears the harvest will be bountiful. The other insists there's too many mouths to feed. And they're both right. Without mass death to temporarily halt population surges, food scarcity comes earlier and harder. You walk on, past a church ringing its midday bell. Inside, the pews are packed. No mass graves here, no monks scribbling panic notes about bodies piling 3 deep. Just incense, sermons, and that one lady in the back who's clearly asleep. The church, too, is stronger. Without the Black Plague to make people question divine mercy or its absence, faith holds firmer. People cling to old structures longer. The same bishops stay in power. The same orders stay unchallenged. Heresy doesn't surge, and the bubbling undercurrent of doubt that once seeded the Reformation, it's delayed, bottled up, festering in silence. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, in this Europe that never broke, there's stability. Too much even, and that has consequences. No plague means no sudden power vacuums. No empty chairs for bold new leaders to fill. Monarchs live longer. Bureaucracies become bloated. The young wait decades for a chance to rise. You're not rebelling against the system. You're just waiting and waiting and waiting. Back in our world, the plague snapped those systems like twigs. Here, they calcify. And yet, paradoxically, life feels fuller. Streets are busier, markets hum with noise, festivals run longer, weddings get rowdy. There's a sort of manic joy in the air because no one remembers death coming like a thief in the night. The trauma never etched itself into the culture. You've never heard the stories of children burying parents, then getting buried by their siblings hours later. Still, just because you dodged one horror doesn't mean you've won the game. You sneeze. The woman next to you jumps. Not from fear of disease, but because you sneezed on her turnip stew. There's no plague, but there's still the flu, and food poisoning, and dysentery. And let's be real, medieval cheese is always a gamble. You pass a street musician playing a lute with 3 strings. Kids dance in circles. A drunk tries to sing along. In this version of the world, culture thrives too, but it's noisier, messier, more crowded, less space for deep introspection, more room for accidental elbowing. You finally get home. 1 room, 10 people, straw bedding that smells vaguely of goose, and you sleep, not because it's peaceful, but because exhaustion is universal. And this world, this one you've stumbled into, it's already starting to feel dense, as if the future's pushing too hard against the walls of the past. Remember, you dodged the Black Death, but now you're face to face with a different kind of danger: overpopulation, inequality, and a history that still wants to happen. You wake to the sound of hooves and shouts echoing through narrow stone alleys. A noble's entourage thunders by, velvet banners flapping, armor clanking, someone tossing coins at a beggar purely for show. In this world without the Black Death, that noble may live to a ripe old age, his lineage uninterrupted, his name written in ink rather than carved into a tombstone at 35. His father ruled. He rules, and soon his son will too. Boring, right? But boring can be dangerous. Without the plague to reshuffle the aristocratic deck, Europe's monarchies settle into something closer to permanence. No sudden coronations, no opportunistic cousins claiming thrones because the entire royal family just keeled over in a month. The 100 Years' War still happens, but in this version of reality it burns out quicker. Kings don't die mid-battle from festering buboes. Negotiations aren't derailed by panicked nobles fleeing cities thick with smoke and superstition. And the peasants? They stay peasants. Without a massive die-off, no labor shortage hits to flip the power balance. In the real world, the Black Death gave surviving serfs bargaining power. Fewer workers meant higher wages, so much so that rulers actually tried to freeze wages by law. But here, there are still plenty of hands to till the land. You, for instance. You're probably ankle-deep in mud right now, planting barley for some snobby lord whose greatest hardship today was running out of imported cloves for his venison stew. Historians still argue whether this population stability would have resulted in fewer uprisings, but what's certain is this: fewer shocks to the system mean fewer opportunities for change. No Jacquerie rebellion in France, no English peasants' revolt with pitchforks and a teenage king in a panic. Just the quiet, grinding endurance of a feudal system with no incentive to evolve. You hear gossip on the road. A messenger passed through last week, said the King of Castile signed a treaty with the Moors. No one cares. Politics happens far away, and nothing much ever changes. Your village keeps its rhythm: birth, tax, harvest, repeat. But there's something else happening, something invisible, at least at first. With monarchs living longer, wars shrink in scale. There's no generational whiplash, no succession crises every few decades, fewer civil wars, fewer local lords taking up arms just to test their swords. The continent, ironically, gets more peaceful. But not in a warm, fuzzy way, more like a stagnant pond. Peace without progress. A social order that doesn't get rattled is one that resists reform. You see it everywhere. From how your mayor still uses the same parchment from 10 years ago to announce taxes, to how the local priest reuses sermons about humility while wearing gold-trimmed robes. And remember that noble from earlier, he's part of the reason. Without plague deaths thinning out the aristocracy, their power doesn't just stay strong, it grows. More marriages between noble families, more consolidation of land and wealth. The rich, it turns out, are really good at staying rich when their lungs aren't filling with blackened pus. Your neighbor groans. He's been digging a well for weeks, trying to avoid using water from the river, where everyone still bathes, dumps waste, and tosses the occasional chicken. If you're lucky, you might live to 45. If you're noble, 60. But if you're poor, Your greatest medical innovation is prayer and garlic, lots of garlic. Now here's a twist. Those extended royal bloodlines mean more consistent diplomatic ties, fewer pop-up wars, but more complicated politics. Marriages become like spreadsheets, carefully calculated alliances stretching across generations. In this world, France and England may reach détente decades earlier. Spain unifies without delay. The Holy Roman Empire? Still a mess, obviously. Some things never change. You pass a tavern on your way back from the fields. Inside, soldiers are drinking quietly. No battle scars, no stories about burying their entire unit. Just stale ale and grumbling about inflation. Without war or pestilence to thin the ranks, even armies are bloated. More men than missions, more swords than causes, which leads to a weird side effect. Dueling becomes the rage. You can T-swing a lute without hitting a bored noble, challenging another bored noble over an insult involving soup. Seriously, someone got stabbed over leek soup. You overheard it just last week. As night falls, the town crier announces new curfews. Crime is up, too many people and too little to do. But justice is slow. The nobles are more concerned about inheritance than law. And since none of them are dropping like flies from disease, they have all the time in the world to argue over who technically owns that riverbend you fish from. You lie down on your straw mat, trying to sleep. Somewhere in the distance, a minstrel plays a tune so off-key it could scare rats. You close your eyes and think, what kind of world is this, really? One where kings sit longer but fewer legends are born. One where the old never die young, but the young rarely rise at all. A world of continuities and quiet rot. No Black Plague, no reset button, just more. More nobles, more rules, more waiting. And you, still stuck in the mud, watching time stretch like a cobweb over an unmoving sky. You blink awake to the muffled toll of a distant church bell. The air is thick with incense and last night's smoke. Someone nearby is already chanting in Latin, their voice echoing off the stone walls. You sit up slowly, straw crackling under your tunic. The village is alive, buzzing, crowded, perfectly ordinary. But the church? Oh, the church is still towering, unchallenged, and watching everything. In this version of history, the plague never comes, so the clergy never face their reckoning. No wave of mass deaths to empty abbeys. No terrified monks scrawling prayers with shaking hands, wondering why their faith doesn't save them. No parishioners losing trust in priests who drop dead faster than the sinners they scold. The church remains whole, untested by pestilence, and with stability comes authority. The Pope? Still sitting comfortably in Avignon? Or maybe Rome, depending on which side of the schism timeline you've tumbled into. He's older now, healthier. There was no Black Death to cut his predecessors short, no rush to elect new popes in panicked conclaves. No chaos, just power, extending like vines over every facet of life. You enter the chapel. It's packed, the altar gleams, not from some divine glow, but from relentless polishing. The stained glass windows shimmer like gemstones in the morning light, and behind the pulpit a bishop drones on confidently and endlessly. He doesn't fear doubt. Not yet. In the world you remember, the Black Death forced people to ask hard questions. Why did God allow this? Why did holy men die just like commoners? Why didn't prayers stop the disease? Those questions, whispered in grief, eventually cracked the church's facade. But here, no such challenge comes. Faith, untouched by tragedy, becomes stagnant. Monks still copy texts by hand. No explosion of interest in secular learning. No hunger to find meaning outside doctrine. Galileo hasn't even been born, but you already sense he'll face a harder crowd. Historians still argue whether the plague directly triggered the Renaissance and the Reformation, or just hastened them. But one thing is clear: trauma accelerates change. Without it, this world drifts slowly, almost lazily, across centuries of the same. You step outside again. The street is lined with shrines, all lovingly maintained. The Virgin Mary gazes down from every corner. Saints stare blankly from painted panels. No one's questioning indulgences. No one's buying up heretical tracts in secret. You pass a baker's stall. A woman buys a loaf and crosses herself, not out of fear, just habit. Everything here runs on habit, even education. In this world, universities remain almost entirely clerical. Theology dominates the curriculum. Logic and rhetoric trail behind like bored children. There's no post-plague surge in literacy, no desperate push to understand nature's wrath, no explosion of curiosity about anatomy or medicine, just lectures, Latin and long pauses. But here's a twist. In this stagnant academic soup, a few strange fish still swim. You hear whispers about a man in Prague who claims to turn lead into gold, another in Florence who collects bones and talks to them, and in Paris, a scholar who insists the Earth might not be at the center of the universe, then hastily adds, "But don't quote me." The Church tolerates them. Barely. But with no crisis to weaken its grip, it doesn't feel threatened. Instead, it absorbs them, wraps them in red robes, gives them titles, turns them into pet eccentrics. You know, like that one uncle everyone finds amusing until he starts asking about the shape of the stars. Still, these minds fester quietly under frescoed ceilings. A few of them begin to write, carefully, codexes filled with ideas too new to be burned, but too risky to be read. And while you wouldn't know it from the street, the printing press, the very device that once helped challenge centuries of dogma, will take longer to spread here. Without the cultural shock of plague, there's no need to democratize information. Books stay expensive, rare, and holy. You walk by a scriptorium. Inside, 3 monks work silently, bent over vellum, copying texts at a pace so slow it could outlive boredom itself. One sneezes, the other blesses him. They keep writing. Later, you hear a sermon. The priest speaks about obedience, submission, the divine order of things. You look around. No one blinks. Everyone nods. Because here, God hasn't been questioned. And when he's not questioned, neither is anyone else. You sit in the back pew, watching candlelight flicker on the old stone walls. For a second, you wonder what it would take to wake this world up, to shake its certainty. You imagine a whisper, a fire, a book no one's supposed to read. But that's not today. Today, the world stays as it is, unplagued, unbroken, unchanged. You leave the church. Your feet echo on the stone. The sun is high now and the marketplace hums, but deep beneath the chatter and the bells and the incense, something inside you itches. You don't know why, not yet, but it might just be doubt. The market is overflowing. Fish glisten in the sun, bread steams on wooden carts, and wool bundles pile high like greyish clouds. But more than anything, there are people. People everywhere. Elbow to elbow, boot to clog, cough to sneeze. No one's dying in the streets, but no one's giving you personal space either. In this world without the Black Plague, the cities haven't thinned out. Not once. You push past a man arguing over the price of onions and accidentally step into something mushy. You don't ask. You just keep walking. See, the plague was many things. Horrific, yes, but also a hard reset. When it tore through cities, it cleared entire neighborhoods, gutted households, burned social systems to ash. And in that destruction, something like breathing room emerged. But not here. Here, you glance down an alley and see a chimney belching smoke. Behind it, another house leans dangerously close, and another, and another. It acts like someone copied and pasted the same hovel 50 times with no concept of urban planning. Because there wasn't any. In this version of events, medieval cities don't just grow, they metastasize. Wooden homes expand upward, like timber tumors. Rooftops loom precariously over cobbled streets. Narrow staircases spiral through tenements where 6 families sleep like sardines. You can hear them snoring through the walls. No one ever moved out. No one died in droves, so naturally they just kept building on top of each other. Historians still argue whether medieval city planning was ever truly planned. But one thing is certain: when cities weren't periodically emptied by plague, they bloated instead. You walk past an apothecary, then a baker, then 3 more apothecaries, each one squeezed between homes that looked like they were drawn by a drunk architect with a shaky hand and a grudge against straight lines. The stench hits you next. Chamber pots emptied directly into the street. Sewers, a luxury for the rich. Most waste runs freely into ditches, mixing with rainwater, straw, and, let's say, organic surprises. You sidestep a puddle with something floating in it that's better left unidentified. And the water. Don't even think about drinking it. Wells are too shallow, rivers too foul, rain barrels too unreliable. You remember your neighbor boiled his yesterday, then got sick anyway, probably from the ladle, which his cousin uses to clean boots. At night, the problems get louder. Coughs echo through the alleys. Babies cry in shifts. Rats scurry across rooftops, perfectly healthy and well-fed. In our world, the plague turned these rats into tiny grim reapers. Here, they're just freeloaders. Still gross, just not deadly. Your own home isn't much better. 1 shared room, 1 shared bed. The family goat tied up near the hearth. Everyone breathes the same air, eats the same gruel, smells the same soot. There's no quarantine, no reason to isolate. Why would there be? And yet no one's afraid. Not really. Because in this version of the past, fear hasn't set the tone. It's overcrowding, not panic, that defines daily life. And here's a weird detail. Because people don't die as frequently, they also don't marry as early. Why rush when life expectancy stretches a little longer? But that delay doesn't slow childbirth. It just shifts the chaos to new generations. More mouths, fewer resources. By the time you're old enough to marry, your family's already sleeping 6 to a blanket. You take a walk past the guild quarter. In another world, many of these trades would be half vacant. Blacksmiths wiped out, weavers vanished, apprentice slots wide open. But here, every stall is packed. The guilds are overstuffed with journeymen who can't find work and masters who can't afford to die. So what happens? They start tightening control, fewer apprentices admitted, more fees. Legacy members get priority. Innovation gets smothered by tradition. You see it in the tools they use, unchanged for decades. You hear it in the muttering of a tanner, cursing the new methods from Italy. Progress here is like molasses in January. Still, there's noise. There's music. A wedding passes you by, complete with flutes, ribbons, and a chicken. Someone's clearly had 1 too many drinks to hold properly. Life, for all its mess, still goes on. But something's different from the cities you know. It's not just the smell or the chaos, it's the feeling of claustrophobia, like there's no space left to grow, no breathing room, no pause button. You remember that in our world, the plague accidentally created that pause, burned down the stage so a new play could begin. Here, the old play never ends. And you, unlucky theatre-goer that you are stuck in the cheap seats with a view of nothing but a man selling spoiled figs and a kid next to you picking his nose. You duck into a tavern. Inside, the air is thicker but warmer. The fireplace crackles. The barkeep wipes a cup with a cloth that may actually be dirtier than the cup. A man plays a fiddle with 3 strings and a missing bridge. Still, people laugh. They dance. The music is bad, but the ale is strong. And here's the thing. It works. This overcrowded world still has its joy, still has its rituals and its comfort. You might even say it feels more human, but without disease to remind people of their fragility, something's lost too. There's no urgency, no push to improve, just endurance, more of the same. The ceiling leaks slightly above your head. No one seems to care. The night wears on, and outside, the city groans under its own weight. You wake to a rooster screaming in your ear. It's perched on the rafters again, because in this timeline, personal space is just a rumor. You roll over, accidentally elbow someone, maybe a sibling, maybe a cousin, Maybe that one guy who just kind of lives here now. No one's sure. As the sun creeps through the cracks in your wall, a familiar thought creeps into your mind too. You're never going to own this place. Not this room, not this home, not this patch of land outside. Because here, where the Black Death never came, the old world still owns everything. You step outside, and the fields stretch golden and orderly, each one claimed by a noble who has outlived all the usual reasons someone might lose land: war, disease, or unfortunate oyster poisoning. In the world you know, the plague left huge estates empty. Fields grew wild, manor houses went silent, and peasants suddenly mattered because someone had to bring in the harvest. But here, there was no gap, no vacancy, no desperate landowners offering wages and deals. Instead, the same families rule, the same contracts hold, the same peasant obligations chain generation to generation like heirlooms made of debt. Your father sowed the same furrows. Your son will sow them too. Maybe his son will get promoted to miller if the current miller ever kicks the bucket. Spoiler, he won't. Historians still debate how permanent serfdom really was, even with the plague. But most agree that where death tore through Europe, it forced the ruling class to adapt, sometimes begrudgingly, sometimes bloodily. Not here. Here, the lords never flinched. You walk past your landlord's manor house. It's got a new coat of paint, imported wine, and a hedge maze no one has dared enter since the cook got lost in it for 3 days. He came out clutching turnips and speaking in rhyme. Inside, the noble's sons study law and Latin. His daughters embroider tapestries of battles they never fought. His dogs eat better than you. His horses have shoes. You don't. The Lord waves as you pass. You bow. He doesn't. Back in the village, you see a man hauling wood. He's been hauling wood for 20 years. He looks strong enough to lift an ox, but his back curves like a question mark. His wife runs the ale stall. His kids collect dried dung to sell as fire fuel. They're not poor because they're lazy. They're poor because they're stuck. You walk on, stopping near the old well. A group of young men huddle there, muttering. One spits. Another glances toward the manor. They talk about leaving, heading to the city, joining a guild, learning a trade. But the guilds are full, the cities are packed, and the roads are dangerous. So they'll stay. Because in this world, without a plague to break the feudal web, social mobility is a ghost story. Everyone's heard of someone who got out. No one's met them. And yet, something's brewing. One of the young men mentions a preacher, says he's traveling through the region, talking about fairness, about a world where the lowly aren't born to serve and the high aren't born to rule. Radical stuff, dangerous stuff. And you smile, because even in this stiff-necked version of history, hope has a way of finding cracks. But for now, those cracks are shallow, and the weight of tradition is heavy. You return home, your mother is boiling lentils. She gives you a smile, weary but warm. The smell fills the room. Someone plays a flute badly in the corner. Someone else curses at a splinter. It's not a miserable life, just a small one. Predictable, contained. No plague meant no purge. No purge meant no rise. And while your stomach might be full tonight, your future is still empty. You lie down, pulling the scratchy wool blanket over your head. You can hear the wind whispering through the gaps in the wooden wall, like it's trying to say something important. Maybe it is. Maybe it's saying, change is coming, but not yet. First, this world has to notice it's broken. The sun peeks over the crooked rooftops of the village, casting long, warm shadows across the cobbles. You stretch, yawn, and instantly regret inhaling. Someone's already frying something that smells suspiciously like spoiled turnips. Breakfast in the no-plague timeline never promised elegance. As you step into the street, something feels expectant. You hear whispers near the well. Old Marta says her cousin in Milan saw a painting of flying machines. A boy running barefoot beside you shouts that a man in Venice has built a contraption with spinning mirrors. You squint at him. He grins. He says it shows you your own soul. This world, thick with people and unchanged monarchies, is beginning to itch. Not in the rat-flea swarm of doom kind of way. More like a restless energy stirring under the surface, and you recognize it. It's the first flickers of what might become a renaissance. Or might not. Because here's the catch. In our world, the Black Death snapped the spine of certainty. People who'd believed in divine order watched it collapse in the face of unstoppable death. That rupture, it forced a new way of thinking. Humanism, skepticism, scientific curiosity, they all got their bootstraps from plague-fueled chaos. But here, the world never cracked, which means the Renaissance doesn't quite roar. It murmurs. Historians still argue whether Florence was destined for greatness regardless of the plague. But without that shock to the system, artistic genius arrives not like a lightning strike, but like a late dinner guest, still wearing yesterday's clothes. You walk through your town square, someone's selling portraits, flat, expressionless, religious. The idea of painting a person as they are, with flaws, with personality, that's still years away, maybe decades. No Da Vinci sketching the anatomy of corpses, no Michelangelo sculpting fury into stone, no Botticelli weaving paganism into Christian silk. Instead, the arts remain polite. And Florence? Oh, poor Florence. The city still hums, still trades, still builds, but not with the ferocity born of rebuilding after devastation. Instead, it's safe, and safe rarely produces revolution. You overhear a merchant talking about a new architect from the north who wants to redefine symmetry. The man scoffs. Why change what works, he says, gesturing toward a church built before his grandfather was born. You glance at it, it's fine just to fine. But let's talk about the thinkers, because there are still thinkers. You visit a workshop, not a studio, not yet, and inside, a man fiddles with gears. He's built a device that counts rotations. It doesn't do much yet, but he swears it'll help map the stars. His name isn't famous. In your world, maybe he would have been. Here he's just the weird guy with too much time and a tendency to monologue. You ask what he's working on. He tells you it's inspired by a dream. Not by grief, not by existential dread, just a dream. And that's the difference. Without the plague, there's no fire under these ideas. The sparks are still there, sure, but the fuel is wet. In your world, Da Vinci saw death and wanted to master life. Here, Da Vinci might still be born, but he'll likely paint icons and build wine presses. You pass a street theatre performance. The jokes are old, the stories recycled. Nothing to offend, nothing to challenge. People laugh, but no one gasps. You sit and watch for a while. It's pleasant, comfortable, predictable. Then someone whispers a name, Petrarch. Now, there's a thought. He's still around in this version, writing sonnets, obsessing over Cicero, longing for ancient Rome. But his famous quote, the one where he says, "I seem to be born in a different time." Well, here it just sounds like complaining, because no plague means no obvious break between eras, no old world versus new. Everything here blurs. You walk past a school. Children chant Latin phrases in sing-song tones. The curriculum hasn't changed in a century. Still drilling doctrine, still memorizing scripture, still afraid of too much imagination. Except for one girl in the back, doodling something that looks suspiciously like a dragon eating the moon. You lock eyes. She smirks. Hope. Even here the embers smolder. But it's slow. So slow. You remember how in your timeline, artists and scholars went digging through the ruins of old Rome, like archaeologists of thought, desperate to understand why their present felt so broken. Here, there's no urgency, no brokenness, just a steady plod of continuity. And continuity, as it turns out, makes for very stable, but very sleepy progress. By evening, you're back in the tavern. The fire crackles. A man recites a poem about the glory of heaven. No one questions him, no one claps. They just nod, drink, and turn back to their stew. You lean back and wonder, will the Renaissance ever arrive here? Eventually, yes. But without the plague's violent shove, it might never soar. It will crawl, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one to wake it up. It's late. The tavern is mostly empty now, save for a drunk bard humming a song about geese and sin. You step outside into the cool dark, moonlight painting the cobblestones silver. You glance up. Stars blink overhead, far, far away, but still watching. And you start to wonder what else is out there. Because while Europe missed its plague, something else hasn't paused. Far to the east, the winds are shifting, and they're carrying something big. You wouldn't know it from your sleepy village, but the Mongols still ride. In your original timeline, the Black Death helped bring the Mongol Empire to its knees. Trade routes shattered, cities collapsed. Troops died by the thousands, not by arrow, but by fever and cough. It gutted their infrastructure from within. But here, they're fine. Better than fine, actually. With no plague to cripple their armies, the Mongols remain the greatest land force the world has ever seen. Historians still argue whether the empire would have fractured anyway. Too big, too unstable. But without plague, it holds together longer. And that means pressure on Europe from the east doesn't ease. It builds. You hear stories from traveling merchants. They speak of eastern warriors with fur-trimmed armor, carrying banners painted with wolves. Of new counties forming stronger diplomatic ties, of cities like Samarkand and Karakorum thriving with gold, silk and ideas, and of whispers, just whispers, that some Mongol generals now look west not just with curiosity, but hunger. In your village, the roads are still dirt and the castles still short. Europe isn't ready. Not for this. You remember how in your world, the Mongols were often portrayed as a storm that passed. Fierce, sudden, but ultimately brief. Here, they're a slow-moving glacier, relentless, unbroken. And culturally, their influence spreads deeper. Paper money arrives sooner, so does advanced archery, composite bows, stirrup-mounted cavalry techniques. Even gunpowder trickles west faster because the plague didn't sever the Silk Road this time. The road is open, alive, and buzzing with caravans that stretch like serpents across the steppe. You meet a traveler near the inn who carries strange maps and smells like cinnamon and dust. He speaks 5 languages, wears boots stitched in Persia, and has a dagger from Cathay. He tells you stories of cities where the buildings touch the sky and water flows through marble channels in the floor. You blink. You've never even seen a real toilet. The Mongols were never just warriors. They were organizers, connectors. They built systems across continents, postal services, protected trade routes, shared laws. Without the plague, those systems last longer, and Europe finds itself surrounded by empires that are cleaner, faster, and more curious than it is. A local priest warns that foreign tongues are dangerous, that the East is full of heresy. But in secret, your town's mayor has already bought silk from a man who speaks fluent Mongolian and knows how to calculate taxes faster than the bishop's scribe. The pressure builds, and still, your people don't quite see it. They're too busy fighting over pig theft and who gets the good pew at church. They don't realize that the next great wave isn't a disease, but an empire that never collapsed. You see a group of soldiers drilling in the village square. Chainmail clinks, spears wobble. No one's aiming at anything. It's more of a hobby than a defense strategy. And meanwhile, across the steppes, real armies march. Europe in this timeline grows old without getting wise. But here's where things get interesting, because the Mongols weren't just coming for land, they were carrying knowledge too. Astronomy, algebra, medical texts from Persia, recipes for steel, navigation tools. And here, without plague-induced fear to shut borders and burn books, more of that knowledge slips in. You pass a miller's boy who's sketching something in the dirt, circles, compass points. He says he met a man from the East who taught him how to tell time by stars alone. Not bad for a kid who barely knows how to count past 20. So while Europe plods forward, the Mongols push it from behind. Politely. At first. But soon things will escalate. Because empires don't sit still forever. You climb a hill just outside the village. Below, torches flicker like stars on the ground. You imagine, just for a moment, what it would be like if a Mongol column rode through here. Silent, swift, unstoppable. Would they burn it all? Or just improve it? Would they be conquerors or reluctant teachers? You don't know. All you know is this. Without the plague, the East never lost its fire, and now it's coming west, not with a cough, but with thunder. The sound of a drum draws you back into town. It's not a war drum, not yet, but the beat is quick, alive, and a little off. A traveling caravan has arrived, and with it, something far more valuable than gold. Stories. You follow the crowd as they gather around a wagon bursting with fabrics, spices, and strange trinkets. The merchant at the center speaks in a sing-song accent, something foreign but soft, his words sliding through the air like warm oil. He is from the Islamic world, and his presence here, that means something big. Because in your world, the one you remember, the Black Death devastated not only Europe, but vast stretches of the Islamic Golden Age. It didn't kill the culture, but it dimmed the lights. Libraries burned, scholars scattered, and cities like Baghdad never truly recovered. But here, no plague, no collapse. Baghdad remains a jewel. Cairo still pulses with trade. Cordoba, still under Muslim rule, is a living encyclopedia. Science and philosophy continue not as lost treasures, but as everyday currency. You lean in as the merchant tells tales of astrolabes that read the stars, of surgery performed with precision, of scholars debating Aristotle and algebra in the same breath. One of the children beside you asks, wide-eyed, "What's algebra?" You chuckle. Good question. In this timeline, the Islamic world doesn't retreat. It expands, not through conquest but through connection. And Europe, still clinging to its relics and rituals, slowly begins to realize it is not the center of knowledge anymore, if it ever was. Historians still argue whether the Islamic Golden Age truly ended because of the plague, or because of Mongol invasion, or political infighting. But one thing is certain, without the Black Death it lasts longer. Its influence deepens, and its ideas flow westward like perfume in the air, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. You pass by a physician's shop. Outside, someone has set up a table with herbs, bandages, and a curious glass jar filled with what looks like honey and copper wire. You raise an eyebrow. The apothecary shrugs. "It's from Andalusia," he says. "They say it clears the mind." You're not sure if that's science or snake oil, but either way, it's new. And in this world, new still feels rare. The merchant continues. He speaks of irrigation systems that pull water from the earth like magic, of libraries that hold tens of thousands of books, of women who read, debate, and teach. The crowd murmurs. This isn't what they expected. You glance at your local priest, standing stiff in the back, arms folded. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. You can feel the tension. This world is still rigid with tradition, still slow to bend, but the pressure is building. Ideas are knocking, and some minds are quietly opening. Even in art, things begin to shift. You walk past a stonemason carving a cathedral arch. He frowns, glances at a folded parchment beside him, and adds a swirl that looks suspiciously not European. You ask where he learned that. He shrugs. "Some fellow from Damascus showed me, said it brings harmony." He doesn't understand the math behind it, but he likes how it looks. And that's how it begins. Little changes, small admixtures, the kind of subtle influence that worms its way into architecture, fashion, language, like how everyone now says alcohol and algebra. without realizing those words came from the same desert winds. You pass a bakery. The bread smells different, richer. You ask. Saffron, the baker says, from the east. You raise an eyebrow. You can afford saffron? He grins. Not for long. It's a joke. But it's also a sign. Trade is booming, not in fits and starts, but in thick, steady veins. The arteries between civilizations haven't clotted with plague. They pulse with life. Caravans arrive, ships dock, markets swell. And through it all, the Islamic world is not just a trading partner, but a cultural superpower. And here's something you notice. Women in your village start wearing their hair differently, not because someone told them to, but because the merchant's wife, visiting from Isfahan, showed them how to braid it with silk and pride. Influence doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it slips through a braid. By dusk, the caravan is packing up. Children beg for one more story. The merchant indulges them with a tale about a flying horse, a prophet, and a moon that split in two. You can't tell if it's a bedtime story or a metaphor. Either way, the sky above you feels just a little bigger. As the wagons roll out, you feel the shift. Not a revolution, not yet, but a rebalancing. Europe may not know it, but it's no longer the smartest person in the room. The world outside its borders is alive, brilliant, and for once, not bleeding. And if you listen closely, you can hear the future, whispered in Arabic, carried in silk and scented with myrrh. You stand at the harbour, watching the sea foam curl around the wooden stilts of the docks. It smells like salt, fish, and something that might be fermented cabbage. Behind you, sailors shout in half a dozen languages, each voice carrying a different accent, a different urgency. The port is booming, and you've never seen so many ships. Without the Black Plague to throw the world into chaos, trade routes never buckle. The Silk Road stays open. The Red Sea hums with spice ships. The Black Sea, the Baltic, even the English Channel. They're all tangled into a web so dense, you swear it could catch the moon if it dipped too low. You watch a galleon from Lisbon unload barrels of olive oil and crates of painted tiles. Next to it, a slimmer vessel from Alexandria brings silk, saffron, and scrolls. Dock workers, sweating, shouting, grinning, haul the cargo like ants building an empire. And in a way, that's exactly what's happening. This world, this plague-free version of history, has never paused, never reset, and because of that, global trade accelerates like a wagon going downhill with no one holding the reins. Historians still debate whether the explosion of early trade in the 14th century would have reached such intensity if the plague had never hit. But here, it's undeniable. The gears of commerce never rust. The wagons never stop. The world grows smaller by the minute. You step aside as a merchant rolls a cart past. It's filled with glassware from Venice, each goblet wrapped in goat's wool and labeled in 3 different scripts. Latin, Arabic, something you can't even recognize. And behind it all, money changes hands faster than blessings at a wedding. But not everyone's thrilled. You hear grumbling from a local blacksmith. Used to be people bought from me, he mutters, glaring at a box of Chinese bells hanging in the market. Now they want trinkets from the other side of the world. Welcome to globalization, and it's arriving centuries early. Back in your world, the plague stalled this process. Ships were quarantined, ports closed, goods spoiled. People grew afraid of what traveled in the belly of a boat. Here, fear never sets in. And the results are overwhelming. You pass a butcher's stall selling dried meats from 4 countries. A seamstress displays fabrics you've only ever seen in paintings. A boy offers a fruit called a banana. You stare at it. It stares back. The cities feeding these markets are changing too. Genoa, Marseille, London, Constantinople. They swell with the weight of global goods and the cultures they carry. Music changes, fashion mutates. People start arguing over whether cinnamon belongs in bread or meat. You try both. It works either way. But beneath the hum of progress, another note begins to play, a darker one, because where goods flow, so do diseases. And while the plague missed its shot, other illnesses hitch rides. Dysentery, cholera, smallpox, none hit as hard, but they chip away in smaller, quieter ways. The difference? There's no widespread trauma to spark change. So sanitation lags behind trade. You see it every time someone dumps a bucket of fish guts near the water barrels. Still, people keep coming. The port is a magnet, and you realize something strange. You're no longer sure what country you're in. The languages have melted together. The goods no longer have borders. Even the coins, some stamped with crescent moons, others with lions, are accepted without much fuss. This isn't just commerce. It's a new kind of identity, a soft rewiring of the medieval world, one that doesn't wait for permission, one that doesn't care about your village, its old customs, or the priest's warnings, one that replaces isolation with curiosity. You pass a ship being loaded with crates marked for Vinland. The name sounds mythical, almost fake. You ask a sailor where it is. He shrugs. West, beyond the ice, we think there are people there. And just like that, you understand. The age of exploration is going to arrive much earlier here. No plague means no decade-long setbacks. No labor shortages to delay shipbuilding. No fear of traveling merchants. The map is going to stretch fast. And if history is anything to go by, Europe isn't just going to visit new lands, it's going to claim them. You watch the sun dip behind the sails, your feet tingling with anticipation and unease. The world is getting smaller, but somehow your place in it feels smaller too, because you realize that in this timeline, the global stage is getting crowded fast, and only those with power, ships and gold are going to dance on it. Everyone else, they'll carry the cargo. The streets are quiet this morning. Too quiet, honestly. You tiptoe past the baker's stall, noticing something missing. It's not the bread. That's there, still warm, still lumpy. No, it's the noise. No coughs, no cries, no moaning from open windows. In the world you remember, the sight of a silent street would have meant only one thing. The plague had arrived. People would be locked inside, chalk crosses smeared on their doors, hoping to outwait death with dried herbs and holy water. You'd see priests carrying incense, mothers wailing, and those eerie plague doctors with their bird-like beaked masks drifting through fog like cursed spirits. But here, none of that. Because in this version of history, the plague never came. No beaked masks, no robes stuffed with thyme, no bell that tolls "bring out your dead." You walk by the apothecary and realize he looks bored. He's organizing leeches by size. That's not a joke. He genuinely seems to think that big leeches do more sucking. And this is the heart of the problem. Without the urgency of the Black Death, medicine stays weird, not completely stagnant, but directionless. There's no crisis to challenge old ideas, no desperation to improve surgical tools. No one pushing to understand why some people get sick while others don't. Historians still argue whether the plague really drove Europe's medical revolution, or if it was just part of a larger shift. But here, without that sudden horror show, everyone's just muddling through. You walk into a healer's hut. It smells like moldy rosemary and regret. A woman with shaky hands offers you a potion made of vinegar, nettles, and what she proudly calls dragon tongue. You ask what it treats. Everything, she says. You back away slowly. Elsewhere, a man's leg is being amputated with a rusty saw and an enthusiastic prayer. He's awake. He's screaming. You decide not to stay for the finale. And still there are true thinkers. You hear about one man in Padua who's dissecting animals, arguing that humors don't explain everything. Another in Avignon tries to map the nervous system using frog legs and twine, but these minds are scattered and they're not respected. The church, still powerful, still untouched by the trauma that once loosened its grip, tightly controls anatomy. The soul, they say, resides in the body. To cut the body is to cut the sacred. So, no autopsies, no medical journals, no real progress. You remember in your world how the plague forced people to ask hard questions about health. Why did some survive? Why did isolation help? Why did burning clothes make a difference? Out of that came the beginning of hygiene, of quarantines, of contact tracing, rudimentary as it was. Here, they still believe that sickness comes from bad smells and bad thoughts. That if your liver's feeling gloomy, a peppermint leaf and some goat urine will perk it right up. You find a man lying in an alley, holding his stomach. His friend stands over him, rubbing garlic on his forehead and whispering something about cursed cheese. You're tempted to intervene, but what would you say? Maybe try washing your hands. They wouldn't get it, because no plague ever forced them to. You walk back toward the square and you see a vendor selling tiny relics, Saint bones, holy water in walnut shells, strips of cloth blessed by a monk with questionable hygiene. People buy them, not out of faith, but because that's what you do when you're afraid of the unknown, and the unknown here remains vast. You pass a monk scribbling notes by candlelight. He's working on a manuscript about dreams and divine smells. You ask if he's ever read Galen. He nods. Brilliant man, terrible handwriting. You press further. Has he ever questioned Galen? He gasps. Why would I? His work was copied by angels. Right. So, no change coming from that direction. Later, at the tavern, you listen to a traveling barber bragging about removing someone's headache with a well-placed slug to the temple. He laughs. Everyone else does too. No one asks if the patient lived. You sip your drink and stare at the candle flame. Medicine, like everything else in this timeline, has been robbed of its great alarm bell. Without the plague, there's no rude awakening. No wave of bitter curiosity to sweep through society. Just leeches, garlic, holy water, and the occasional lucky guess. Outside, someone sneezes, everyone blesses them and walks on, because here, sickness is just part of life, not a crisis, not a mystery to solve, just something you endure with herbs and hope. You awaken to the clatter of hooves and the faint creak of wooden wheels turning over cobblestones, slick with morning dew. But this isn't a royal parade or some exotic caravan. It is a printer's wagon, books, scrolls, loose sheets of parchment bouncing in crates. The kind of cargo that, in another world, would spark a revolution. Here, it's just another delivery. You jog beside the cart, curious. On the back, in faded ink, the words Gutenberg and Sons are barely visible. The name rings a bell. In your timeline, Gutenberg's press was a powder keg for change, mass-producing ideas, challenging church authority, feeding rebellions, revolutions, and reimaginings. But in this world, the press came late. Not because Gutenberg didn't invent it. He still did, still tinkered in his shop by candlelight, still smudged his robes with ink, but because no one was desperate enough to need it. No Black Death. No cries for information, no mass death to scatter priests and send commoners scrambling for answers. Just the same structure, the same trust in gatekeepers, the same slow drip of knowledge. Historians still debate whether the printing press changed the world because of what it printed, or because of when it arrived. But here, the when is different. It shows up in a calm, orderly world. A world not primed for disruption, but content with repetition. You stop by a bookseller's stall. The prices are outrageous. A small psalm book costs as much as a goat. A larger one? 2 goats, and a promise you'll name your 3rd child after the seller. And what's actually being sold? Mostly religious texts, approved sermons, saints' biographies with questionable accuracy and far too many footnotes involving divine vegetables. No scientific manuals, no anatomy guides, no radical philosophy, just doctrine. You ask if they have anything by that strange man from Florence, Dante. The seller frowns. We don't carry fiction, he says. You nod slowly and walk away, your dreams of the inferno flickering into smoke. Elsewhere you find a scribe, still in business, still hunched over parchment, still copying text by hand. His quill scratches the page with the same rhythm monks have used for centuries. You ask him how he feels about the printing press. He doesn't even look up. "They'll never replace this," he says, gesturing to his cramped little ink-stained fingers like they're holy relics. The problem is clear. There's no hunger here, no great upheaval. The people haven't been taught to question. They haven't seen what it looks like when the world tilts and suddenly you need to know why. You stop by a university lecture later in the afternoon. The professor is reading aloud, verbatim, from a manuscript. The students nod, some asleep with eyes open. One is carving something into his desk. Another is scribbling poetry in the margins of his notes. No one is asking questions, and no one is passing books around, because they can't. The press exists, but it's slow, expensive, and still under church supervision. Each book must be approved, each text reviewed. Gutenberg's original hope that knowledge could be for the people is smothered by bureaucracy and theological suspicion. You remember in your world how printing spread heresy, sparked revolts, challenged popes. Here it spreads boredom. Even pamphlets, those glorious, angry little papers that once fluttered across cities like rebellious birds, are rare. No one's risking that here, not with the Inquisition breathing down parchment-stuffed necks. And still, you sense a shift. A few odd volumes appear in secret. One merchant whispers about a book of questions, written in plain language, passed between sailors. Another speaks of hand-pressed almanacs, predicting tides and eclipses with surprising accuracy. A midwife claims she has a guide to herbal treatments that doesn't mention saints once. Small rebellions, ink-sized. And here's something wild. Children. You see one hiding in a stable, reading a weathered book of fables. She looks up, wide-eyed. Do you want to hear the one about the fox who fooled a king? You sit beside her and listen, because here, where the press came not with fury but with a yawn, stories still matter. They just need more time to find their audience. By sunset, you're back in the square. Another printer's wagon rolls in. The driver looks tired. His hands are black with ink. You ask him what he's carrying this time. "Blank pages," he says. "Monks want to fill them by hand." You don't know whether to laugh or cry. But you do know this. The press may have arrived late, but it's not gone. And somewhere, maybe in the back of a dusty shop or in the hands of a curious child, the spark still waits. Not loud, not fast, but certain. The sails snap in the wind like impatient flags, and the harbour's edge is buzzing again. Only this time, there's a different kind of tension. The ship docked here isn't trading silk or sugar or spices. It's unloading something heavier. Men, soldiers. You weave through the crowd, catching pieces of overheard conversation. "New world," someone says. "Mountains of silver," says another. "All they had were feathers and drums." And just like that, you know, it's begun. The discovery of the Americas. In your world, the one defined by plague and its aftermath, Europe limped into colonization. Reeling from death, desperate for wealth, drunk on printing press certainty and holy vengeance, it stumbled westward, armed with desperation and ambition. But here, Europe arrives full and loud, stable, strong. No collapsed feudalism, no labor vacuum, no questioning of church or crown, just clean boots, fresh steel, and enough entitlement to sink a galleon. Historians still argue whether the colonization of the Americas was inevitable. But here, it's not just inevitable, it's faster, cleaner, more confident. You follow the soldiers as they haul crates off the ship, crossbows, cannon parts, iron nails, and bolts of fabric meant for bartering or bribery. There's no hesitation, no uncertainty. They know they will win. Because they're not bringing smallpox by accident. They're bringing it on schedule. In this timeline, without the Black Death to decimate Europe, the population is larger. Much larger. More farmers, more sailors, more priests, more everything. And that means more ships, more weapons, more fuel for the fire that will sweep across the Atlantic. You walk into a tavern where a man in a red sash boasts about a gold river he saw in a place called Hispaniola. He slams his mug down and says they've already begun building a fort. The locals don't understand ownership, he laughs. We'll fix that. You sip your drink quietly. In your world, disease did most of the conquering before the swords arrived. But here, with Europe untouched by plague, it doesn't just send ships, it sends structure. Organized fleets, military codes, legal systems, bureaucrats, and priests, lots of priests. You see them gathered on the dock, holding icons and holy water, preparing for the voyage to this new world. They speak with rehearsed compassion and absolute certainty. This is not exploration. It's colonization with a full stomach. But there's something even darker, something you wouldn't expect. The indigenous populations across the ocean who suffered so catastrophically from smallpox, measles, and influenza don't get a break here. Those diseases still travel west, riding the breath of sailors, hiding in barrels, clinging to canvas. Because while Europe avoided the plague, it didn't avoid being a disease factory. Crowded cities, poor sanitation, animal proximity, all the elements for biological horror are still present, just focused outward instead of inward. You remember reading once that disease doesn't care about your intentions, it just needs a ride. And in this world, the ride is fully funded. Back in the village, people whisper about the new lands with wonder. Rumors spread fast. They say there are trees made of cinnamon, lakes filled with silver, that birds speak Latin and fish volunteer for dinner. No one knows what's real, but they don't care. Opportunity has arrived, and so begins a different kind of migration. Not the desperate kind you saw in the post-plague world, where broken families searched for new beginnings, but a smug, bloated kind. Expansionism with a monocle. Colonizers who believe they're owed the earth by divine inheritance. You pass a map maker etching a new continent onto pigskin parchment. He doesn't know what shape it really is. Doesn't care. He's already carved a flag into it. Future colony, he says proudly. You ask about the people who already live there. He pauses. Oh, we'll teach them. They'll be grateful. You look around the workshop, a row of half-finished maps. None show mountains, none show rivers. Just names, names that weren't there before. And then it hits you. This version of Europe is too prepared, too organized, too disease-free, too institutionally intact, too full of confidence in its own righteousness. The conquistadors won't just be reckless adventurers here. They'll be administrators, engineers, accountants, and their legacy will stretch further, last longer, and be harder to untangle centuries later. You walk the streets as the sun sets. A new poster hangs on the church wall. It reads, "Volunteers needed. Civilize the new world. God rewards the brave." Below it, a sketch of a bearded man handing a child a book. Behind him, a sword, and beside the sword, a cross. You turn away. Because even in a world without the Black Death, some shadows still find their way across oceans. It's morning again, but something feels off. The town square is bustling like usual, vendors yelling over each other, goats slipping their ropes, children playing in the mud. But the colors feel duller. You don't know why until you glance up at the church's stone wall. No murals, no frescoes, just blank grey stone. You keep walking. There's no skeleton peeking from a tomb, no hourglass held by a robed figure, no wide-eyed saints staring into the void of human suffering. You realize what's missing: the art of death. In your world, the Black Plague created a strange, grim beauty. Painters, sculptors, poets, they all tried to wrestle with death. They painted dancing skeletons, wrote poems to worms, carved tombs where bodies emerged mid-decay, half rotting, half praying. But here, that confrontation never came. Without plague, there's no sudden flood of grief to pour into art, no obsession with memento mori, no reminder that time is a blade at your neck. People still die, yes, but they die predictably. after long, uneventful lives of soup, taxes and sermons. And when death comes like that, it doesn't inspire visionaries. It inspires paperwork. You wander into a local chapel. The walls are painted, but it's all tame. Pastoral scenes, saintly gazes, a lamb here, a chalice there, everything washed in soft, forgettable color. It's not bad, but it doesn't shake your soul. You remember in your world how Hieronymus Bosch painted nightmares crawling across canvas, hybrids of animal, sin, and nightmare. How Peter Bruegel captured whole villages spinning into madness, not because he was mad, but because everyone was. The plague cracked something in the human psyche, and art poured through the gap. Here, that gap never opened. You stop by an artist's booth at the edge of the market. He's carving wooden toys and religious icons. You ask if he's ever painted anything darker. He hesitates, then chuckles. Why would I paint death? That's not what people pay for. You nod, but you feel it again. That sense of stagnation. Art has become a mirror, not a window. It reflects what people already believe, not what they fear, not what they question. You walk past another shop and find portraits, rows of them, nobles in heavy robes, merchants holding scrolls, women posed with dogs, all of them staring straight ahead with eyes that seem to say, I paid for this. Even the painters themselves look bored. One is chewing on a piece of charcoal, another is sketching the same church tower for the 7th time this week. You ask why he doesn't draw anything imagined. He shrugs. What would be the point? You sigh. Because in your timeline, the plague unmoored people from certainty. Artists responded by exploring the bizarre, the grotesque, the surreal. They painted demons hiding behind walls, angels hovering above hospitals, skeletons waltzing through ballrooms. They captured the chaos because they lived it. But in this calm world, art stays boxed in. And not just paintings. You stop at a puppet show, 2 clumsy figures dancing and slapping each other to the sound of a lute. The crowd laughs. You laugh too. But part of you misses the sharp edge, the biting satire, the kind of comedy born from having to stare death in the face and still crack a joke. Even literature is tamer. You browse a bookseller's stall and find hagiographies, royal chronicles, and one extremely detailed treatise on fish classification. No Decameron, no Chaucer telling dirty stories in a plague-stricken inn, no journals filled with terror, reflection and dry humor in the face of the unthinkable. You ask about fiction, the seller snorts. Fiction? Waste of ink. You walk away. At the tavern, the walls are bare, no mural of the dead clinging to the living, no crude carvings of demons whispering to monks, just wooden beams, a hearth, and the smell of onions. And maybe that's the tragedy. Without the Black Plague, art survives, but it doesn't transform. It decorates, but it doesn't disturb. It pleases, but it doesn't provoke. Because without death knocking on every door, people never felt the need to scream into the void. And when you never scream, well, you never invent opera either. As the sun sets, you pass a child sketching in the dirt with a stick. She's drawn a crooked house with too many windows. A giant bird looms over it. You stop. What is that? You ask. She squints. It's a dream I had. The house was full of people, but no one could leave. And the bird watched them. You smile. Because maybe, just maybe, death doesn't have to show up at the front door for people to imagine it. Maybe art can still dig into the places we don't understand, even in a world that never bled. Rain drums lightly against the tiled roofs, casting a quiet grey over the town. You pull your cloak tighter and wander toward the edge of the cemetery, not because you're revisiting anyone, but because you're curious. It's too clean, too quiet. No fresh graves, no stacked tombs, no hurried burials under unmarked stones. It hits you. This world doesn't remember the dead the same way yours did. And that changes more than you think. Because in your timeline, the trauma of the plague didn't just haunt the living, it shaped how they viewed everything. The dead weren't just gone, they lingered, in stories, in art, in obsession, and with that trauma came superstition, paranoia, and eventually scapegoats, which brings us to something else that's changed in this unplagued world, the witch hunts. You see a gathering in the village square, a fire pit being cleared, bundles of sage laid out, and a man yelling about the devil's garden. For a split second, your stomach turns. You've seen this before. You know where it goes. But then you notice no one's being tied to a stake. Instead, it's a traveling herbalist. He's offering protection charms and tinctures. People are lining up not to accuse him, but to buy from him. That's different. In your world, the plague brought fear, and fear brought violence. Women, especially older ones, midwives, healers, were easy targets. When people couldn't explain why death swept through their homes, they blamed those on the fringes, witches, curses, black cats and evil eyes. Here, with no mass death, there's no mass hysteria, no communal trauma to twist suspicion into rage. Witch hunts don't erupt into state-sponsored torture and fire-lit executions. They stay small, superstitious, yes, but rarely fatal. Historians still argue what role the Black Death played in fueling witch panics across Europe. Some say it was one of many factors. Others believe it cracked the foundation, letting the madness seep in. But in this timeline, the madness simmers. You sit near a group of women weaving baskets and talking about a girl in the next town who claims she saw a ghost in the woods. They laugh. One suggests she lay off the mushrooms. Another says, tell the priest maybe he'll write a sermon about it. No pitchforks, no torches, just gossip. That doesn't mean there's no darkness, though. You pass a chapel where a priest is giving a sermon about temptation. His eyes narrow as he speaks about midwives and moon cycles and the dangers of women who spend too much time alone in the forest. You can feel the tension under his words, like a blade hidden in a smile. But without the social collapse of the plague to fan the flames, suspicion never ignites into policy. You won't see entire villages emptied, women tortured, until they confess to crimes they don't understand. The Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous witch-hunting manual, is never published here. No market for it. Still, belief persists. A boy whispers to you about a woman who talks to birds. A shepherd claims his sheep stopped dying after drinking water blessed by a widow near the river. You find a circle of stones in the woods, charcoal marks, feathers, bones. Magic lives here, quietly. Not feared, not worshipped, just acknowledged. And that gives rise to something odd. In this world, folk magic evolves not in opposition to religion, but alongside it. Without mass persecution, old practices survive. Candle rituals, protective charms, herbal cures. They're passed down like recipes, not secrets. The line between superstition and tradition blurs, and no one really minds. You visit a home where a child is sick. The mother lights 3 candles and sprinkles salt in the corners of the room. Then she prays, not to a saint, not to a demon, just to whatever listens. You ask her why she does it. It helps me feel like I'm doing something, she says. Even if I'm not, you nod. Because you understand now, in a world without a shared catastrophe, people still fear what they can't see. They just don't burn anyone for it. Yet, you walk back into town, where an old woman is reading fortunes with river stones. A priest strolls by. They make eye contact. She nods. He nods. That's it. No accusations, no spitting, no gathering of angry neighbors with rope in their hands. The plague in your world shattered communities. Grief fractured reason. Here communities are crowded, flawed, superstitious, but still whole. That doesn't mean this world is free from cruelty. It just means the fear hasn't festered into frenzy. Not yet. And as the rain continues, as incense smokes from a nearby windowsill, you find yourself strangely relieved, because even in a world of slow progress and stagnant art, it's comforting to know that sometimes not killing each other is the progress. You spend the next morning in a bustling square, listening to a man try to sell a tonic made from boiled radishes and goat urine. Guaranteed to remove demons, back pain, and unwanted dreams, he shouts, waving a glass vial like it's made of gold. No one stops him. In fact, someone buys two, and that sums up medicine here. But if there's one thing even murkier than medicine in this world, it's science. Or rather, what passes for science. You glance around the town. No laboratories, no telescopes, no chalkboard equations. Just cauldrons, herbs, and scrolls filled with symbols that look suspiciously like someone sneezed while drawing. In the plague-ravaged timeline you came from, science began to break free out of sheer necessity. When the old explanations failed, when prayers didn't stop the dying and relics didn't cure the boils, people started looking elsewhere. Some turned to observation, to experimentation, to the idea that maybe the world could be understood, not just feared. But here, the old world never failed, and that means the new world never began. You step into a dusty scholar's room, books stacked to the ceiling, most still unread. A man with a long beard and a longer index finger is ranting about Mercury and the soul of metals. He's not a priest, he's an alchemist, and he's not a joke. He's respected. In this version of history, alchemy is still king, because no trauma ever knocked it off the throne. Historians still argue whether alchemy ever could have become chemistry on its own. But without the Black Death to force re-evaluation of everything, the transformation hasn't even started here. The alchemists still chase gold from lead. They still whisper about philosopher's stones, and they still believe, honestly, passionately, that the body is made of four humors that need balancing like a moody horse. You ask about gravity. The scholar blinks. Like falling down. Right. You back away. Down the road, a young man is drawing circles in the dirt. He's talking to himself about the stars, the angles of the moon, the way Venus seems to change color. He's got no instruments, no models, just questions. And no one listens to him. Because without the crisis of the plague, without the crack in the wall of old belief, there is no reason for people to look up and wonder why anything works differently than they were told. You remember Galileo, hounded for pointing a telescope at the sky and daring to suggest the Earth wasn't the center of everything. In your world, that rebellion mattered because people had already begun questioning things. Here, questioning gets you ignored, not executed, not imprisoned, just dismissed. You sit at a tavern table where a group of men are debating the causes of disease. One swears it's caused by stars, another says it's bad air, a third points to unbalanced thoughts, and recommends prayer followed by fasting and a garlic foot bath. You ask if they've tried boiling instruments. They look at you like you suggested black magic, because here cleanliness is still seen as suspicious, as if washing hands might wash away your soul. You sigh. Even universities aren't safe havens for new ideas. You visit one, and the students are reciting Aristotle, word for word. Not because they admire him, but because they're required to. You suggest maybe, just maybe, Aristotle was wrong about something. A professor drops his quill. Blasphemy, he says softly. You get the sense he's only half joking. But there are glimmers. A young woman shows you a journal filled with herbal studies, what grows where, what heals what, how long each plant takes to dry. She calls it kitchen wisdom, but it's observation, cataloguing, experimentation, it's science. It's just not called that yet, and that's the quiet irony. And science is still happening in this world, but it's hidden. It's whispered, it's uncelebrated. A monk testing fermented grapes for preservation. A baker who's realized yeast behaves differently when exposed to smoke. A ship captain who started tracking winds with charcoal and parchment instead of prayer. It's there, but it's crawling. Because no great rupture ever told people the old ways were wrong. And when nothing breaks, nothing gets fixed. You walk outside, the stars are coming out, you look up, and the sky stretches endlessly above you, just like in your world. But here, no one's building telescopes yet. No one's measuring, no one's charting, just watching. And maybe that's where science starts too, with watching. Even if it takes a little longer, even if the plague never pushed it out the door. The sun rises slow and heavy over the hills, casting long gold lines across Florence's cobbled streets. From a distance, the city almost sparkles. Domes, towers, arches, all hinting at a future that never quite ignites. You enter through the northern gate just as merchants roll in with carts stacked high with cheese, wine, and old habits. Florence still feels important, still smells of ambition, but something is off. Too much body, not enough soul. In your world, Florence was a crucible, where plague-driven desperation met leftover Roman brilliance and exploded into genius. Artists, architects, philosophers, they didn't just dream, they dared. The trauma gave them fire. Here, the fire never got lit. You walk past a sculptor carving a saint's face into marble. It's technically perfect, yes, but lifeless. You've seen this expression 100 times in other churches, on other statues. There's no innovation, no fury, no spark. You step into a courtyard, hoping to find apprentices arguing about form and shadow. Instead, they're eating figs and discussing wheat prices. One mentions an architect who wants to build a dome without scaffolding. The others laugh. Why change what works, one says. You shake your head. That architect's name? Filippo Brunelleschi. In your world, he changed architecture forever. Built the great dome of Florence with math, mirrors, and madness. But here his patrons are content. The church didn't lose half its funding in mass burials. It didn't need bold ideas to heal a city's soul. So Filippo, he still sketches, still dreams, but no one listens. Historians still argue whether Florence needed the Black Death to birth the Renaissance. But one thing's clear, pain accelerates imagination. Florence was once a phoenix. Here, it's just a very well-fed pigeon. You wander into a chapel. A fresco covers the wall. Soft blues, muted golds, predictable saints. Nothing like the raw, human drama of Giotto's Lamentations or Masaccio's pulsing realism. Those painters, they're still here, but they're not desperate, they're comfortable, and comfort breeds repetition. You pass through a market where a man sells pigments. He brags about how long his blue lasts, how rich his red looks on velvet. But you ask him if he's ever tried painting emotion, suffering, grief. He blinks. Why would I do that? Exactly. Even the Medici, Florence's infamous art-funding power family, have mellowed. In your timeline, the post-plague world made them bold, risk-takers. They funded madmen. Here, they fund saints, just saints. Endless, polite, loop-haloed saints. You stop by a cafe, well, a man selling questionable wine from a barrel and calling it a cultural salon. Two men sit beside you discussing poetry. Their favorite topic? Order, structure, balance. You ask about chaos, about love, death, and the thin line between brilliance and madness. They frown. One says, "You sound northern." You take the compliment. As the day stretches on, you visit a gallery. The walls are clean, the lighting is good, the paintings are safe. You're halfway through before you realize you haven't seen a single human flaw. No wrinkled skin, no dirty feet, no scarred martyrs. It's beauty without edge, perfection without pain. And you start to understand Florence, in this world, grew but didn't transform. Without the fear, the loss, the haunting memory of streets filled with the dead, there was no hunger to mean something. Art here is product, not prophecy. You climb to a rooftop as dusk settles over the city. Below, candlelight flickers in thousands of windows. Florence is alive, rich, busy, but it's not burning. You close your eyes and picture what could have been Michelangelo's chisel-biting marble, like it owed him money. Da Vinci dissecting bodies in secret. Botticelli dancing between the divine and the erotic. Madness, beauty, brilliance. Here, you hear a lute and someone singing a song about olive harvests. Nice, but forgettable, and you realize it's not that Florence failed. It's that it never needed to rise, because no plague ever forced it to rebuild. And a city that never breaks never has to become anything more. Paris smells like roast duck and sewage. You arrive by riverboat, drifting past rows of shops, leaning so close to the Seine you'd think they were trying to jump in. The city bustles, swells, groans under its own weight, and then keeps going, as if sheer density is a badge of honor. No plague ever swept these streets, so no great fire came to cleanse them. You step off the boat and instantly regret it. The street is narrow, the air thick, and the gutters run with things you do not want described. A boy sprints past you barefoot, slipping in something and laughing hysterically. He offers you a chunk of bread before disappearing into a crowd. Paris, in this world, is alive, too alive. And it shows. Buildings lean at odd angles. Wooden eaves nearly touch overhead. The second floors of houses were built wider than the first, each new generation stacking itself on top of the last like an architectural game of regret. You look up and see laundry, a pigeon, and someone dumping what you hope is water into the alley below. The city's grown, yes, but not up, just inward. Denser, heavier. In your world, the Black Plague gutted Paris more than once. Left the streets quiet, eerie, changed. People who survived built differently, wider boulevards, open courtyards, a respect for airflow and sunlight. Eventually, that led to Haussmann and his famous redesigns. Here, no such need. Historians still debate whether the Haussmannian overhaul of Paris was just Napoleon III's vanity project. But many agree that population stress and centuries of disease outbreaks pushed the city to reimagine itself, to breathe. Without the plague, Paris doesn't breathe. It chokes. You push through the crowd and make your way into a bakery. Inside, the air is warm, thick with flour and gossip. A woman is arguing that her neighbor's pig has been relieving itself in her doorway again. The baker nods sagely. "That's why we keep the door closed," he says, handing you a crusty roll that might also be a weapon. It tastes good, though. Outside, the noise is constant. Hooves, bells, shouting, singing. A man playing a hurdy-gurdy off-key. You're shoulder to shoulder with strangers, none of whom seem aware of personal space. And this is the real issue. With no plague to wipe the slate clean, no waves of death to empty houses and thin crowds, the population of Paris has ballooned without any of the reforms. The sewers, primitive, the streets, narrow, the water, sketchy. You pass a water seller shouting prices for a ladleful of clean river water. The bucket he's using is cloudy. A rat scurries by, unconcerned. You duck into a church, hoping for silence. No luck. It's packed, not for mass, but for shelter. Several families have taken up unofficial residence in the back pews. A priest tries to clear them out with polite Latin and vague gestures. No one moves. You sit and listen to the city breathe. It wheezes. You remember how, in your world, plague forced urban reform. Slowly, painfully, yes, but it came. Public health boards, early sanitation, a belief, however flawed, that clean streets mattered. Here, you hear someone say miasma like it's gospel. A doctor walks by wearing gloves made of waxed linen and a necklace of dried lavender. He smells like desperation and rosewater. You pass a school where children are crammed, 6 to a bench. No windows, one inkwell. The lesson is about Latin grammar and obedience. The teacher never looks up, and yet, for all the claustrophobia, there's vibrancy here. Street performers dance badly but earn coins. Lovers sneak kisses behind laundry lines. Philosophers shout at each other over soup. People live here, fully, messily and unbothered. They don't know there's a better way. You climb the stairs of a narrow tower, 3 turns, 4 turns, 5, and emerge to see the rooftops stretching endlessly, tangled and teeming. The city glows in the sunset like a great organism too large for its own skeleton. And you wonder what would have happened if it had broken, if the plague had come, thinned the crowds, cracked the system and forced change. Would Paris be beautiful? Would it breathe? Or would it lose something wild and precious in the process? Maybe this city isn't meant to be clean. Maybe it was always meant to burst at the seams. You climb back down, stepping carefully, because the stairs are worn and slick and someone spilled soup on the fourth step. Or blood. You don't ask. At the bottom, a boy hands you a sprig of thyme and says, "It will protect your lungs." You smile. You might need it. The fog rolls in low and damp as you cross the narrow stone bridge into London. It clings to your cloak, your boots, your eyelashes. The air smells like smoke and river sludge, with just a hint of roasted chestnuts and human waste. Lovely. But what hits you hardest isn't the smell, it's the sound. Nothing stops. Carts creak, dogs bark, hammers ring out. Every street is packed, every alley brimming. It's like the city has forgotten how to exhale. This is London, unpurged by plague. In your world, the Black Death slammed London again and again, 1348, 1361, 1665, each time culling, collapsing, reshaping. It cleared space for rebuilding, for fire codes, for pipes, planning, and, eventually, clean air acts. But here, it never broke. It only piled. You step into the city proper and feel like you're being swallowed. Buildings lean into each other. Upper floors jut so far out you're walking in semi-darkness even at noon. There's moss growing where the sun never touches. You wonder if this alley has ever seen daylight. It probably hasn't. A boy bumps into you. He apologizes and darts into a crowd. A minute later, a man with a broken nose and a broken lantern shouts something about rotten fish and stolen boots. You decide not to get involved. You pass a butcher's stall where meat hangs in the open. Flies have formed a small kingdom. The butcher swats lazily. "Only one disease in this world," he grunts, "and that's hunger." You're not sure he's wrong, but you are sure that this city is not okay. Because without plague to force innovation, sanitation never took priority. The Thames is still a dumping ground. Chamber pots still fly from second-story windows. "Garde low!" they shout right before it hits the cobblestones or someone's head. And still people pour in. The industrial age hasn't started, but London is already choking on its own ambition. Merchants, nobles, bakers, thieves, everyone's here and no one has room. A family of 8 lives in a room meant for 2. The father is a chimney sweep. The mother sells candles made of suspect tallow. The children sell anything. You step into a tavern, ducking under a low beam. Inside, it's loud. People laugh, eat, argue. A man recites poetry to a goat. You're not sure if it's a performance or a breakdown. Either way, the goat is unmoved. A woman offers you cider that tastes like regret. You take a second sip. Upstairs, someone coughs. No one flinches. And that's the thing. You realize no one here fears disease, not like in your world. There's no cultural scar. No inherited memory of entire neighborhoods sealed off and burned. No fire breaks, no emergency councils, just mud, money, and motion. Historians still debate whether the plague forced urban reform in London or simply delayed it. But in this world, reform never comes at all, because nothing ever forced anyone to care. The poor, still crammed into tenements, the rich, still riding above it all in carriages with perfumed kerchiefs, and the city, it just grows. Not outward, not upward, just deeper, like rot. You hear about a new sewer plan being proposed, gravity-fed tunnels, underground pipes, stone reservoirs. It sounds promising until the council says it's too expensive. "But people are dying," someone protests. "They're always dying," comes the reply. "That's what people do." You step outside again, and then you see it. A rat, fat, confident, trotting down the middle of the street like it owns the place. A cat watches it pass and doesn't even bother. Maybe they've made peace. Maybe everyone has. You wander toward the edge of the city where a group of workers are digging a new foundation. They joke, wipe sweat, spit into the mud. One of them says they found bones yesterday, dozens, old ones. Stacked like firewood, he says. You ask if they reported it. He shrugs. Ground's full of bones. London's been burying people under itself for centuries. And he's right. But in your world, many of those bones belong to plague victims. Whole cemeteries dug in weeks, bodies buried without coffins. It was horrific, yes, but it created the need to remember, to change. Here, the dead vanish quietly. London has no time for ghosts. You walk back through the city as night falls. Lanterns flicker, rats squeak. Someone sings off-key about ale and sorrow. The street glows orange with firelight, and you realize it's beautiful in its way, but suffocating. Without the plague, London never learned to breathe. It just kept inhaling. And now it's too full of people, of noise, of history, and none of it ever got a chance to burn. You wake to the sound of bells ringing, soft, distant, metallic, like someone politely announcing the end of the world. A merchant passes you muttering about Mercury and divine favor. Another woman says her son is having visions again. You try not to roll your eyes, but then you see the boy, eyes wide, face pale, pointing at the sky with ink-stained fingers. He says he's seen the sun fall. You pause, not because you believe him, but because they do. Welcome to the age of alchemy. You wander into a cluttered workshop. Bottles clink. The air smells like sulfur and desperation. A man in a stained robe squints at you over thick glass lenses. He's boiling something in a copper bowl. Nearly have it, he mutters. Just one more drop of rabbit's blood. You don't ask. Alchemy, in this world, is still the cutting edge. Without the Black Plague to shake the walls of belief, science hasn't replaced it. Rationality hasn't taken the reins. Experimentation hasn't kicked open the doors of mystery. Instead, mystery has leased a bigger office. Historians still argue whether alchemy would have evolved into chemistry on its own, or whether it needed the rude shove of skepticism that came after the Plague's failure to be explained by theology. Here, the shove never happened. Faith in the unknown order stays strong, too strong. You sit beside an apprentice, barely a teenager covered in soot, mixing rosewater with vinegar and whispering an incantation. He thinks it will turn copper into silver. You ask if it's ever worked. He grins. Once, but it turned back. Of course it did. The local bishop strolls by the workshop later. He blesses the alchemist, not out of mockery, but out of genuine respect. In this world, alchemists aren't fringe lunatics. They're holy men of matter, sorcerer priests, pseudo-scientists cloaked in incense and metaphor. It's not that they aren't intelligent, it's that they're aiming at the wrong target. Because they're not trying to understand nature. They're trying to manipulate it without understanding it. You pass a public square where a crowd gathers to watch a transmutation attempt. A man in golden robes swirls a goblet, chants something in Latin, and drops a lump of lead inside. Smoke, a flash, some glitter. Everyone gasps. You squint. It's glitter. You ask someone nearby what they think just happened. He made gold, they say, breathless. I saw it. You didn't. But it doesn't matter, because belief here is stronger than proof. And that's the crux of the thing. In your world, the repeated failure of medieval medicine, alchemy, and old doctrine, especially in the face of the Black Plague, created cracks in the faith logic dam. People started asking dangerous questions. What if we're wrong? What if the world doesn't work the way we want it to? Here, those cracks never formed. So the dream of alchemy still floats high in the clouds, unchallenged by gravity. You step into a bookstore and find shelves full of volumes like the sacred sulfur, the golden compass of bones, and divine transmutation, a spiritual guide to metal conversion. They sit proudly beside prayer books. You ask the shopkeeper if he sells any books about atoms, molecules, or acids. He blinks. What's a molecule? You nod slowly. Right. You walk back into the street and see another boy with a glass pendant swinging around his neck. He says it holds the essence of light. He tells you it glows when evil is nearby. You offer to buy it, but he refuses. It's my only protection, he whispers. You don't argue, because deep down, you know he's not being silly, he's being logical in the only system he's been given. And the saddest part? He's not wrong. Not in this world. Because when everyone believes in hidden truths, symbols, and sacred materials, those beliefs shape reality. Merchants sell bottles of soul ash. Priests consecrate river water to purify iron. Mothers draw stars over their infants' cribs to ward off sickness. You even hear of a nobleman who insists his heir must be bathed in gold dust every full moon. It's not just science that's stunted, it's curiosity. Because when mystery is worshipped but not pursued, wonder becomes a wall instead of a window. You walk toward a field just beyond the village. The stars begin to bloom overhead, quiet and eternal. You lay down, staring up, wondering what someone like Newton would think of this world. Would he see the apple fall and ask why? Or would he assume it was Mercury in retrograde? You exhale, and in the distance, someone lights a torch beneath a cauldron. They whisper to the flames, and hope. You dream of silence, not peace, not serenity. Actual bone-deep silence, the kind that comes when the street's empty and the wind has nothing left to move. You wake with a start. It's still dark outside. A dog barks once, then stops. The night feels heavier, like the air has weight. And then you realize why. There's sickness in the village, not plague. That would have made people panic. It creeps slower. You walk past shuttered windows. Candles flicker behind cracked glass. A woman is scrubbing her doorstep with vinegar and rosemary. She doesn't say why. She doesn't need to. You already know. The thing about a world without the Black Death is that it doesn't mean a world without death. It just means death arrives wearing different shoes. In your world, the plague came fast, loud, unforgettable. It made people confront the limits of knowledge. It forced innovation. It reshaped culture, medicine, and the very concept of fate. But here, death comes slow, and the world doesn't react. It adapts or ignores. You step into the apothecary's shop. The shelves are full, too full. Every bottle looks the same. The man behind the counter doesn't look up as he mutters, "Garlic in the morning, thistle by noon, ash by night." You ask what it cures. He shrugs. "Depends." Depends on what? No answer. You walk out into the square where a preacher is announcing a holy fast to rid the town of illness. People nod. One woman faints. No one catches her. You remember in your world how waves of plague made towns shut their gates, made kings flee, made the sick buried before the dirt cooled, quarantine, sanitation, burned clothes, disinfected coins. Here, there's no such memory, no inherited fear, no muscle reflex to push back. So when sickness comes, be it smallpox, dysentery, or something new, it slips in through the front door. It gets a seat at the table, and no one really thinks to ask it to leave. Historians still debate how much the Black Death shaped public health, whether things like quarantine and contact tracing would have happened anyway. But this world offers a brutal answer: they wouldn't have. You visit the town scribe. He's coughing into his parchment, but still writing. He says he's documenting symptoms. Not for medicine, he adds, for the church. They're checking for signs of divine punishment. You nod, but inside you feel something twist, because here people aren't looking for answers. They're looking for blame. Later that day, someone suggests the sickness came from a strange traveler. Another says it's the baker's daughter. She reads too much. A priest quietly mentions the town hasn't donated enough candles this season. You know where this is going. In your world, this behavior happened too, but it got challenged, slowly, because eventually science fought back. Patterns were tracked, experiments tested, data measured. A world that had watched half its population die became obsessed with understanding why. Here, no such obsession ever took root. You sit by a well and watch two men argue over whether the moon has changed shape. They say it looked sickly last night. It's an omen, one whispers. You look up. The moon looks fine. But maybe that doesn't matter. Because without the plague to teach people how dangerous ignorance is, belief has no counterweight. You pass the bakery. It's closed. A red ribbon is tied to the door. No sign. No notice. Just a ribbon. You knock anyway. No answer. You sit on the steps, remembering that in your timeline, cities created burial registries. Doctors kept journals. Even the simplest towns had systems for tracking the spread of disease. Here, people just disappear. You talk to a woman gathering herbs. She tells you time can keep spirits away. She's sure of it. You ask if she's ever seen the sickness go away because of time. She doesn't answer. She just keeps picking. And then there's the midwife. You find her by the river, boiling cloth. She's seen too many fevers, too many stillbirths, too many nights where no one came to help because everyone thought it was a curse. She doesn't believe in curses. She believes in boiling water and sharp knives. You ask why she doesn't teach others. She looks at you and says, because they don't want to learn. And you understand they're not ready. This world, comfortable, confident, full of people and power, never learned how fragile it really is. So when sickness creeps back in, it doesn't panic. It shrugs. And when death comes, it just makes room. You wake up late, throat dry, tongue heavy, and with the vague sensation that the world outside your window isn't quite sure what century it's in. You open the shutters. Same cramped street. Same shouting vendor. Same old man spitting from his window and narrowly missing a nun. But something's different. You see a crowd forming near the edge of town, just past the old goat fence, people whispering, peeking, curious but not afraid. You follow. What you find is unsettling. A man in a long coat stands beside a strange cart made of brass and wood. On the cart, bottles, scrolls, something that looks like a fish skeleton arranged into a mechanical arm, and, most suspiciously, a book with no pictures. He calls himself a health examiner. You raise an eyebrow. What are you examining? Patterns, he says. Cases, frequencies, behaviors, possibilities. You blink. He might be the closest thing to a scientist you've seen. You ask where he's from. Amsterdam, he says. We've started recording data. Diseases don't appear randomly. They follow rules. The crowd doesn't know what to make of this. One woman leans in, squints and asks if he's a magician. He laughs, says no, but then winks anyway. Because in this timeline, this no-plague world, real science is still a whisper. But it's getting louder. You remember how, in your world, the plague gave birth to the idea of contagion. Not spirits, not sins, not curses, just the fact that people who touched the sick also got sick. It was crude science, sure, but it was a crack in the wall. Here, that crack has only just begun to form. Historians still argue about the origins of epidemiology. Was it the plague? Was it cholera? But here, the timeline is slipping forward slower than molasses in December. No urgency, no desperate search for cause and effect. Until now. The examiner opens a scroll. It's a map of the town. Red dots mark homes. He says he's been tracking an illness that only spreads near the river. He suspects it's in the water. You glance at the river. You've drunk from that river. You step back. The crowd scoffs. The river's always been there, someone says. You're saying it just turned evil. No, the man says softly. I'm saying it carries more than fish. They don't get it. But a few start thinking. Later, you see a child with charcoal drawing circles around puddles. You see a scribe making a list of fevers reported in the last week. You even see a merchant pour out a bucket of spoiled wine near a field instead of the street. Small things, but new. And with new behavior comes new pushback. The local priest declares the health examiner's cart questionable. He doesn't ban it, but he asks the man to attend a sermon about humility. The examiner agrees, then immediately begins sketching airflow patterns during communion. You love him. You sit with him over dinner. He explains he is part of a small group, a fellowship of thinkers and observers who write letters across Europe. They don't always agree. Some still believe in humors, others worship data. But they all watch, and slowly they learn. He says the term public health is being whispered in Venice. Contagion has appeared in the margins of a scroll from Seville. Quarantine was tried on an island port last year, not out of fear, but logic. It didn't go well, but they're trying again. This is how science is arriving in this world, not through revolution, but resistance. It isn't kicking down the door, it's slipping in through the cracks. You walk him back to his cart. The town is quieter now. The whispers are fading. The nuns didn't arrest him. The mayor didn't exile him. No one burned anything, but no one really listened either. Not yet, because this world didn't suffer the plague. It didn't need new knowledge to survive, so it never built the muscle to seek it. Curiosity exists, yes, but it's out of shape. Too easily distracted, too easily comforted. The man rolls up his map. Eventually, he says, we'll have hospitals that treat symptoms based on data. We'll have hygiene codes, controlled trials, vaccines. You nod. He stares into the stars. They'll either learn by reason, he pauses, or they'll wait for pain. And then he goes. His wheels squeak over the cobbles, leaving behind a town that doesn't yet realize it's been touched by the future. The morning fog sits heavy over the fields, soaking your cloak and chilling your boots. You watch a farmer toss handfuls of grain into a muddy pen. Pigs grunt, chickens argue. Somewhere nearby, a man curses at the sky because the windmill stopped again. It's all very ordinary, too ordinary. You walk into town, where the market is overflowing. Bread, eggs, wool, soap, repeat. You could buy enough supplies to build a second life and still not see anything you haven't already seen. That's the problem. There's too much of everything, because without the Black Death, the world never got a reset. It just kept growing, and now the weight of it is starting to show. You pass a group of traders arguing over cart space. One says there's no more room at the docks. Another complains about his son sleeping in the goat shed because the house is full. A third mutters about how his sister can't find a husband, not because no one wants her, but because everyone's still living at home, literally everyone. Europe's population in this alternate timeline never dipped, never got cut in half. It rose and kept rising. Families got bigger, cities got tighter, fields grew thinner, resources got complicated. And now, there's a problem no one wants to admit. Too many mouths, not enough bread. You walk past a granary where guards now stand with spears, not because of bandits, but because of locals. Hunger has a smell, and it's starting to waft through the alleyways. Historians still argue what Europe's population would have looked like without the plague. But here, the answer's unfolding in real time. More people, less space, smaller margins. You get the feeling that this entire world is standing on tiptoes, waiting for the floor to crack. You meet a school teacher who says her classroom is so full they've had to teach in shifts. "Morning, boys, afternoon, girls," she mutters, sipping weak ale. "And the goats show up regardless," she laughs. But she's tired. You head to the local records hall, a dusty building that smells like beeswax and bad decisions. A clerk flips through scrolls and charts. You ask him about birth rates. He raises an eyebrow. Up. You ask about food supply. He grimaces. Flat. You ask about housing. He doesn't even respond. Later, you visit a blacksmith who's been working for 16 hours straight. He says he'd hire help, but apprentices want food, not just training. "Used to be," he grunts, "you fed one mouth and got 2 hands. Now you feed 5 mouths and get complaints about soot. You see it everywhere. Boats overloaded, wagons breaking down, bread loaves getting smaller but more expensive. Even the churches are full of bodies, not faith. Families crammed into pews because they've got nowhere else to sleep. The priest just shouts louder, hoping holiness can cover the echo of stomachs growling. And yet, no one is doing anything. Because there's no event, no moment, no shared trauma to act as a warning bell. Just slow discomfort. A creeping sense that maybe the earth doesn't stretch forever, that maybe there are limits, and maybe, just maybe, they're being reached. You pass a noble's estate and watch as guards haul sacks of grain inside. A peasant nearby mutters, "Funny how they're always prepared, isn't it?" You nod, because when collapse comes, it doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives with full baskets and empty futures. You hear rumors. In the south, food riots. In the east, mass migration. In the north, a commune that tried to grow food on rooftops. It failed, but not for lack of trying. You visit the tavern that evening. It's louder than usual, not with joy, but tension. A man argues that the king should build more granaries. Another demands birth restrictions. Someone at the back mutters about cleansing the beggars from the city walls. It gets quiet, and that's when you realize this world didn't escape collapse, it just postponed it. No plague meant no purge, but now the weight is too much. Too many lives stacked on a foundation never meant to carry them. The floor hasn't cracked yet, but it will. And when it does, no one will be ready. You wake before the sun, jolted by the sharp metallic sound of a pan being kicked down the road. Two men are arguing in the distance. It's not about land or money or sheep this time. It's about taxes. You throw on your cloak and head out. By the time you reach the village square, the crowd has already gathered. Farmers, merchants, weavers, smiths, even the drunk with the owl on his shoulder is here, blinking blearily at the commotion. A town official stands on a barrel, reading a proclamation with the kind of smug detachment only someone who never milked a goat could muster. A new tax. Again. This time on firewood. You glance at the crowd. You feel it more than you see it. Something coiling tighter with every word. Not rage, exactly. Not yet. But pressure. In your world, the Black Plague was a great disruptor. It didn't just kill, it reordered. When labor became scarce, peasants found their leverage. They asked for more, demanded rights, and in many cases revolted. In England, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. In France, the Jacquerie. Even in cities, guilds and workers rose up, armed not just with pitchforks but with purpose. Here, that pressure never released. The nobility stayed stable, institutions intact, prices rose, wages didn't. And now, after centuries of imbalance, the common folk aren't boiling, they're simmering. You turn to speak to a man beside you. He doesn't answer, just stares straight ahead, jaw clenched. His wife clutches his arm like a rope she's afraid will snap. Someone near the front throws a turnip. It misses, but the crowd murmurs, and then disperses. No revolt, no shouts, just silence. You follow them as they scatter, back to homes with leaking roofs, back to fields already picked clean, back to workshops where work hasn't paid well in a decade. And you realize what's happening. This world never got the spark. No plague meant no sudden scarcity, no shattering of systems, so no moment ever came where the lower class realized how much power it could actually wield. They still outnumber the nobility, still do all the labor, still carry the weight of the world on their backs, but no one ever told them they didn't have to. You stop by a carpenter's hut. Inside, a boy, maybe 12, is carving a crude image of a king with donkey ears. His father sees you and quickly smacks the carving out of his hands. "Don't make fun of power," he hisses, not because it's wrong, but because it's dangerous. That's how you know fear has settled deep. You walk to the edge of town and find a pamphlet nailed to a tree. It's handwritten, poorly spelled, and signed only with the letter R. It says, "They do not feed us. We feed ourselves. Why then do we bow?" It's short, clumsy, Perfect. You tear it down and pocket it. Later that day, you hear about a group of weavers refusing to work until their guild lowers fees. It's small, it won't last, but it happened, and that matters. Because even in a world that missed the plague, history doesn't forget its own tension. It just stores it in barrels, and every now and then those barrels get a crack. You pass a young girl drawing something in the dirt, a house, a fire, people holding hands in the flames. You ask what it is. She shrugs. Something I saw in my dream. You nod slowly. Dreams are dangerous. So are songs. Later in the tavern, someone sings one under their breath. A melody you don't recognize. Words that sting a little too sharp for coincidence. If lords don't plough and lords don't bake, why do we bend? Why do we break? The fields are ours, the sun is free, and yet we pay for every tree. No one claps, no one dares, but no one forgets. Historians might call this world stable, but you know better. It's not stable, it's stagnant. And stagnant things don't last forever. They crack. And when they do, they don't just leak, they flood. You wake to distant shouting, not angry, not urgent, just tired. That kind of exhausted shouting only comes from someone who's been ignored for too long. You throw on your cloak and head toward the commotion, passing shuttered windows and half-listening priests. The shouting is coming from a young man in the square. He's standing on a crate, arms flailing like they're trying to carry his words further than his lungs can. He's not a preacher, not a noble, not even a merchant. He's just someone who's had enough. You push through the small crowd. The man's talking about food, about work, about dignity, about how his grandfather harvested these fields and his father did too, and how he is still waiting to own the boots on his feet. People nod. Some cross their arms. No one moves. And that's the strange part. Because in a world without the Black Death, it's not just the systems that stayed intact, it's the habits, the rhythms, the belief that this is how it's always been and always will be. You sit on a bench and listen. The man speaks well, not polished, not scholarly, but honest. He says the future feels like someone else's road. He says, we feed the world and still starve by candlelight. You glance around. People are listening, but they're not believing. Yet. In your world, something cracked open when the plague ripped through the seams. All that suffering shattered illusions. People began to see that the world could change, because it had to. That belief led to printing presses, revolutions, republics. But here, the suffering is quieter, slower. The crowd disperses by noon. The man's crate sits empty, one corner chipped like a broken promise. You sit beside it and stare at the church tower, still standing, still unshaken. You think about how many voices it would take to shake it. Probably more than one. You pass a tailor's shop. A girl sits inside, stitching cloth with fingers that move faster than her eyes. She hums a song you've heard before, the protest song from the tavern, disguised as a lullaby. She doesn't look up. That's how you know it's spreading. Not with swords, with rhythm. You stop by the village well. There, 3 older women are whispering, not about bread or taxes this time, but about possibilities. One says her niece wrote a letter to a mayor demanding free grain. Another mentions a friend who hid tools from the landlord's men. Nothing explosive, just resistance by erosion. And that's how change begins in this world. Not with fire, with friction. You visit the school. The teacher now includes a lesson on rights. It's thin, not revolutionary, but it's there. You ask where it came from. She glances over her shoulder and says, it was in a letter from the city. You wonder how many letters are circulating. You head to the docks that afternoon and watch as 2 sailors argue over wages. One threatens to leave. The other says, where will you go? The first replies, anywhere that remembers, I'm not a horse. A fisherman nearby laughs too loud. It catches on. and somewhere inside you the pieces begin to click. This isn't a revolution yet, but it's becoming one. Not with armies, with questions. The kind that spread through kitchens and workbenches, through song and joke and whispered heresy. The kind that once asked, "Don't go back to sleep." You walk the streets at dusk. A child runs past you with chalk in his hand. On the side of a wall, he scrawls something in crooked, uncertain letters. "We are not furniture." It doesn't rhyme. It's not elegant, but it's true. And in this world, slow, bloated and unshaken, that truth might be more dangerous than any sword. Because once people believe they matter, they stop asking permission. They act. You stare at the wall as the wind picks up, and you can almost hear it whisper, "Soon." Night stretches long over the city, but it refuses to be quiet. You step out into the streets beneath a sky smeared with soot and stars, and all around you is motion. Shuffling feet, creaking carts, murmurs through windows. You've walked this world long enough to know its heartbeat, and it's changing. The people here don't shout yet, they don't march, but they know. You see it in their posture, in the way a child refuses to bow, in the way a merchant charges the same price to noble and pauper alike, in the way someone, somewhere, keeps writing messages in chalk on walls that get scrubbed clean by morning. The earth tilts for all, not just kings. In your world, it took the shock of death, the Black Plague, scythe and all, to jolt people into questioning the rules. It was gruesome, tragic, necessary. The horror rewrote the human story. Here, the story never burned, but it's curling at the edges now. You walk past a palace. A man in silk sneezes through a perfumed kerchief. His guards laugh too loudly at something that wasn't a joke. You watch them and you realize they feel it too, the fear. Because even without a plague, there's a truth the nobility can't ignore. The bottom of the pyramid is shifting. Slowly, quietly, but shifting, and pyramids are not designed to bend. You pass a printing shop, open late. Inside, a boy no older than 15 is setting a page. You ask what he's printing. He looks up. "A poem," he says, "about things breaking." You ask if he wrote it. He shakes his head. "Don't know who did, it just showed up." You glance down at the draft. The ink is wet. The words cut clean. You stood above the storm, but forgot who grew the wheat. The hands that fed the kingdom will not kneel at aching feet. You nod. It's not Shakespeare, it's better, because it's here. In this world, in this timeline where no plague came to level the field, but the people are finally learning to sharpen the plowshare into a mirror, and then, if needed, into a blade. You wander toward the edge of the city and look out over the hills. Farms dot the horizon. Smoke curls gently from a dozen hearths. It still looks peaceful, but peace is a mask. And you know what's coming, because even without the Black Death, even without carts of bodies and wailing priests and bleeding skies, history finds a way. The pressure has built for too long. Too many people, not enough change. Too many rules, not enough reasons. Too many voices, told for too many years that silence was virtue. And now, the silence is cracking. You head back into the city. A man walks past you, humming something strange and familiar. A mother comforts her child and tells them that someday the world will be different. A teacher leans over her desk, grading papers in candlelight, and pauses, just for a moment, to smile. Not because it's easy, but because it's happening. Not with fire, not with rats, but with us. Always us. The tired, the overlooked, the endlessly enduring. They've waited too long for permission. Now they're learning they never needed it. The world didn't need the Black Death to break. It just needed time. And time always delivers. So now, as you lay down and let your breath slow, I want you to picture this world. Not the one filled with plague carts and ghost towns, but the one that stayed crowded. The one that didn't fall apart, until it slowly started to crumble anyway. Imagine the cobblestones beneath your feet, The overlapping rooftops, the quiet revolution, simmering in every whispered song and every scribbled chalk poem. Imagine a world that didn't break in one night, but bent day by day until the bending became a quake. You've walked through it. You've smelled its bread, its rot, its ambition. You've listened to the rhythm of lives that never stopped long enough to question the rules they were born into. But now, they do. And somewhere, in that foggy dawn, someone you met today might be the one who lights a match. So let your thoughts drift. Let the weight fall off your chest. And know that history, like breath, is made not just by the loudest voices, but by the slow, steady exhale of those who refuse to give up. You're safe now. The world's still turning. And tomorrow? Well, that's always a mystery worth waking up for.